Let me ask you something. Something simple, yet quietly profound. When was the last time you felt your birthday? Not just acknowledged it, not just smiled at a few notifications, but truly felt it the way you did when you were small, when the world still felt soft and new. Remember that rush of excitement, that tiny drumbeat in your chest as you watched balloons being tied, the smell of cake in the air, the sound of everyone calling your name. For one sacred day, you were the center of the universe. Time itself seemed to pause to celebrate your existence. Now, fast forward, the same day arrives every year, but it doesn't quite land the same way. You wake up, maybe answer a few messages, maybe your mom calls, and then the day folds into the ordinary rhythm of life. You tell people you don't really celebrate anymore. You shrug, laugh it off, say it's just another day. But is it really? Because beneath that calm, beneath that casual indifference, there's often a quieter story whispering underneath. Music. People who treat their birthday like any other day, they're not cold or detached or indifferent to life. They're often the most introspective ones. The ones who've learned to hide their expectations because disappointment once taught them to. Psychologically, birthdays act like mirrors. They reflect your relationship with being alive, your comfort with attention, and your willingness to be seen. When someone says, "I don't care about my birthday," what they often mean is, "I've stopped waiting for validation." But sometimes, if you listen closely, what they're really saying is, "I've stopped expecting it." There's a difference between maturity and quiet withdrawal, and birthdays have a way of revealing which one we've leaned into. Some people genuinely outgrow the excitement of it all, not because they've become cynical, but because they've found peace in the ordinary. They no longer need confetti to feel joy. They've found it in the small, unremarkable corners of life. Morning sunlight through a curtain, a familiar cup of coffee, a quiet evening alone. For them, life itself is the celebration. But for others, it's more complicated. Birthdays carry the weight of memory, not just age, but emotion. Maybe they recall moments of being overlooked, of waiting for messages that never came, of expectations that went unmet. So instead of saying, "This year, I hope someone remembers," they whisper, "It's just another day." It's not indifference, it's protection. A shield made of calm tones and quiet smiles. And that's where the psychology becomes fascinating, because it shows us how the mind learns to adapt. When disappointment repeats itself enough times, your brain begins to lower its own expectations. It's called emotional self-protection. You reduce anticipation to avoid the sting of letdown. You train yourself not to hope too loudly. And though that sounds sad, it's actually a form of wisdom, a way of balancing the heart. Because the brain has one primary rule: protect stability. And when excitement has too often led to pain, stability becomes the safer choice. But there's a quiet cost. Over time, that same self-protection dulls joy. The heart that once shielded itself becomes too careful. You start walking through your own life like a polite guest at someone else's party, smiling, observing, but never quite belonging. Think of how many people say, with a laugh, "Oh, I don't really do birthdays." Yet later, as they lie in bed, they scroll through their minds, noticing who didn't text, who forgot, who stayed silent. We all do this, even the ones who say they don't care, because caring is part of being human. Even pretending not to care is just another way of caring. It's compressed affection hidden under composure. Psychologists have a term for it: avoidant validation behavior. It's when you tell yourself you don't need recognition because you quietly fear not getting it. It often forms in people who once learned that needing anything was inconvenient, that it's easier to need nothing than to risk being disappointed again. So when someone treats their birthday like it's just another day, don't mistake that calmness for apathy. Sometimes it's peace. Sometimes it's control. Sometimes it's both. Because excitement can make you vulnerable, and control feels safer than hope. But control, too, comes with a cost, because beneath that still surface, beneath the phrase, "it's just another day," lives an emotional truth. Every human being wants to be seen, not praised, not paraded, just seen. There's something sacred about birthdays. They mark existence itself. The one day that belongs only to you. Not because of what you've achieved, but simply because you are. And that reminder can stir all kinds of emotion: gratitude, loneliness, nostalgia. Sometimes all three wrapped into one tender ache. Because birthdays quietly remind us of time, of how far we've come and how far we haven't. That's the subtle psychological trigger most people overlook. For some, treating their birthday like any other day isn't about sadness, it's about grounding. A way of keeping time from feeling too heavy. If I don't make it a big deal, they think then it won't feel like another year slipping away. Music. There's also something cultural about this change. As children, birthdays are milestones of belonging. Each candle marks proof that we're part of something, a family, a circle, a world that notices us. But in adulthood, that same spotlight can feel unnatural. Many adults wrestle with the quiet tension between wanting to be noticed and not wanting to seem needy. That invisible tug of war shapes how we treat our own birthdays. Because here's what happens beneath the surface. If you grew up being the strong one, the caretaker, the giver, your mind starts to believe that joy is something you earn after everyone else is okay. You downplay your own needs. You remember everyone else's milestones, but forget your own. Over time, your birthday becomes irrelevant. You wouldn't even know what to do if someone threw you a party. It would feel awkward, maybe even unnecessary. But that discomfort isn't humility. It's emotional fatigue. Deep down, those same people still want to be seen, not with confetti or noise, but with understanding. They don't want attention. They want recognition. They want someone to remember not just the date, but the person they've been becoming all year long. Because that's the paradox of emotional maturity. The stronger and more self-reliant you become, the harder it is to receive love without suspicion. So birthdays turn into neutral ground. Days you simply get through. It's fine, you say. Let's just move on. But behind that quiet voice is a whole orchestra of emotion, a melody of nostalgia for the joy that used to come easily, a subtle ache for the connections that have faded, gratitude for still being here, and a longing for simplicity, for the kind of happiness that once came without effort. And that's what makes this psychology universal. Even if we've outgrown the candles and balloons, part of us still remembers what it felt like to be celebrated without hesitation. That memory lingers like a faint echo in the mind, the echo of being seen once upon a time without having to ask for it. There's a quiet shift that happens as we grow older, one that psychologists call temporal self-awareness. It's that subtle moment on your birthday when you look back at who you were a year ago, and without meaning to, you begin to measure. You measure the distance between who you wanted to become and who you are now. And sometimes that reflection is tender. Sometimes it stings. Because birthdays are no longer just about growing up. They're about growing into yourself, your choices, your patterns, your truth. And when that mirror feels too honest, some people choose not to look at all. They downplay the day, not out of apathy, but out of self-preservation. They're saying, give me space. Let me process my own timeline in peace. So, if you've ever felt strange about your birthday, like you're supposed to feel excited, but you just don't know this, you're not broken. You're not cold. You're simply aware. You've realized that time isn't something to be celebrated, it's something to be felt. That validation doesn't land the same way anymore. That celebration means something deeper now, something quieter, something that doesn't need candles or crowds, because birthdays have never truly been about age. They've always been about meaning. When you were a child, your birthday was the world's way of saying, you matter. As an adult, it becomes your way of saying it to yourself. It's no longer about presents. It's about presence. Not about who shows up, but about how much of you has shown up for your own life. That's the hidden shift no one talks about. And yet, it explains everything, why we stop making a big deal out of it, why the day blends into the week, why we quietly trade external excitement for inner reflection. Maybe without realizing it, we've stopped trying to be celebrated by others and started trying to make peace with ourselves. But even in that peace, there's still an echo. A small, almost imperceptible whisper that says, I hope someone remembers. That's the paradox of emotional evolution. You can be content and still crave connection. You can be grounded and still miss the thrill of being seen. And that's not weakness. That's just being human. Because treating your birthday like any other day doesn't mean you've gone numb. It means you've learned that joy doesn't need to be scheduled. It's something you carry quietly in the small, sacred ways you keep showing up for yourself. That's the softest kind of celebration, invisible to the world, but real nonetheless. Music. But let's look deeper. Because when someone treats their birthday like a normal day, they're not rejecting joy. They're redefining it. They're saying, I don't need the world's permission to feel good about being alive. And that shift from external celebration to internal acknowledgement is one of the quietest, most profound forms of maturity. Because somewhere along the way, we all start to learn that the things which once made us feel special gifts, parties' posts, eventually lose their glow. What starts to matter more is alignment. Did I live this year in a way that feels true? Did I grow? Did I show up when it mattered? For many people, birthdays have stopped being a party and become a pause, a moment to check in, to recalibrate. It's not that they don't care anymore. It's that the definition of celebration has changed. Maybe celebration now looks like taking a long walk alone, or cooking a quiet meal for yourself, or just sitting in stillness and whispering thank you. It's not the loud joy of balloons and music. It's the soft joy of solitude. And that's something our culture still struggles to understand. We confuse quiet with emptiness. But silence can be sacred. In psychology, there's a term for this self-concordant motivation. It's when your values and your actions finally begin to align. when what you do and who you are start to match. And in that alignment, you feel a deeper kind of fulfillment, one that doesn't rely on applause or attention. So when someone spends their birthday quietly, it isn't apathy, it's alignment. They're no longer chasing a celebration that's loud, fleeting, and performative. They've replaced it with something grounded, steady, something that doesn't vanish when the day ends. But even in that peace, there's still an emotional current flowing beneath. Because some people are genuinely content with quiet birthdays, and others quietly wish they didn't have to be. They wish someone else would take the initiative. They wish they didn't have to pretend the day didn't matter. That's the tug of war between two deep human needs, the desire to be seen and the desire to seem unbothered. It's one of the oldest contradictions in us, the longing to be noticed without asking, the wish to be celebrated without requesting space for it. Psychologically, this tension connects to something called earned secure attachment. It's a pattern often seen in people who've known emotional inconsistency, those who grew up learning that affection was conditional, unpredictable, or tied to performance. So they adapt. They learn to depend on themselves. They become strong-grounded, reliable. But even self-sufficient souls carry a quiet hope that someone somewhere will see through their armor, that someone will remember without being told. And so birthdays become subtle tests. Not tests we announce, but quiet emotional experiments the heart runs on its own. Who reached out without a reminder? Who remembered without a prompt? Who still sees me when I'm not visible? Even if we tell ourselves, it doesn't matter, there's a small, soft part of us that still checks. That's not weakness, that's humanity. Because no matter how self-aware, how emotionally independent we become, we never outgrow the need for connection. We just learn to hide it better. Music. There's also a strange paradox in how we relate to time on our birthdays. For some, it feels like progress. For others, pressure. The brain interprets that differently, depending on your emotional history. If the past year has been rich and fulfilling, the day feels like a milestone. But if the year has been heavy, uncertain, the day feels more like a confrontation. A quiet, almost sacred reckoning with yourself. Another year has passed, and the questions you haven't answered still linger. That's why some people prefer to blur the day into the rest of the week. It's not denial, it's self-preservation. It's the mind saying, I'll reflect when I'm ready. And yet, even in that avoidance, the day carries weight. It stirs something deep inside, a mix of gratitude, nostalgia, regret, and wonder. It's as if your subconscious takes inventory of everything that's changed and everything that hasn't. And in that silent inventory, something powerful happens. You realize that birthdays stripped of all tradition and noise are actually checkpoints of consciousness. Moments that ask softly, am I living honestly? Am I still becoming someone I recognize? Do I like the story I'm telling with my life? Pause. When you treat your birthday like a normal day, it doesn't mean you're avoiding these questions. It might mean you're facing them quietly, privately, without an audience. Because not every kind of growth needs to be seen. Some growth is invisible. It's in the way you react differently than before. It's in the way you forgive faster, complain less, or notice beauty in places you once ignored. And maybe that's the truest kind of celebration. Not one that happens once a year, but one that unfolds quietly every day in the way you keep evolving. Still, There's a gentle truth that lingers beneath all of this reflection. Even the most self-sufficient souls, the calm ones, the grounded ones, still deserve to feel special once in a while. Not because they crave validation, but because recognition nourishes the unseen parts of us, the parts that quietly carry others. The ones who treat their birthdays like any other day are often the same people who remember your milestones. The ones who check in first. The ones who give without ever keeping score. They become the emotional anchors in everyone else's story. And sometimes, those people forget something simple, that they too deserve to feel light on their own day. That it's okay to let others give back. That joy doesn't have to be earned through strength or sacrifice, because even the calmest hearts still need warmth. Even the independent ones still need to be seen, not for what they do, but for who they are. There's nothing weak about wanting that. Nothing foolish about missing it. If you've ever felt that quiet ache on your birthday, the kind that hums softly under your chest, not demanding attention, but asking to be acknowledged, that's your heart reminding you that connection still matters. It's whispering that you're human. And that's the whole point of the day. Not to celebrate perfection or productivity, but simply to honor the fact that you're still here. Still learning. Still evolving. Still figuring out what it means to live. Music. So maybe the psychology of people who treat their birthday like any other day isn't about indifference at all. Maybe it's about integration, the merging of joy and reflection, the acceptance that not every emotion has to be loud to be real. And yet, even in that peace, there's always room for small gestures, because one message can still change someone's day. One genuine voice note, one call, one small reminder that says, "Hey, I see you." We often underestimate how much those tiny moments mean to the ones who say, "It's just another day." For them, it's not about the size of the celebration. It's about sincerity. It's about being reminded that their quiet existence still ripples outward, that their presence still matters, even when the world feels too busy to notice. And maybe that's the real psychology of it all, because deep down, none of us truly want to be invisible. We just want to be loved in the language we understand. Some people want fireworks. Others want peace. Some want crowds. Others just want one person who listens. And that's okay. There's no single right way to experience your own existence. So if your birthday ever feels ordinary, if you wake up, make your coffee, go to work, check your messages, and carry on, maybe that's not something to fix. Maybe it's something to honor, because what you're really saying is, my life is already full enough that I don't need one day to make it meaningful. That's not detachment. That's gratitude wearing a quiet disguise. But still, let yourself be soft. If you miss the excitement you once had, it's okay to feel that too. Missing your younger self doesn't mean you've regressed. It means you remember what innocence felt like before the world taught you restraint. And maybe that's the greatest gift you can give yourself, to remember the child who once counted down to midnight with glowing eyes, who believed that one day could hold infinite magic, because that child is still somewhere inside you, waiting not for a party, but for acknowledgement. Waiting for you to whisper, "Hey, I see you." We made it another year. That kind of celebration doesn't fade when the candles go out. It lingers. It stays with you in the quiet moments, in the way you keep going, in the way you continue to love despite everything, music. So, if your birthday ever feels like just another day, don't feel guilty for that. It's not emptiness, it's evolution. It's the mind learning that meaning doesn't need noise. And yet, in the quiet, if someone remembers you, let them. Let them say your name. Let them remind you that you matter, because you do. Even on the ordinary days, especially on the ordinary days, that's the beautiful truth about growing up, realizing that celebration doesn't always need confetti. Sometimes it only needs awareness, a deep breath, a moment of stillness that says, I'm still here. You don't need to make a wish. You already are one, a living continuation of every version of yourself that fought to reach this moment. And that alone is worth celebrating quietly, or not every single year.